The dark web, human trafficking victims literally being held at gunpoint and being issued quotas, the data breaches numbering in the billions occurring just this year alone, and those random text messages you received, or that phishing email you received, or that scam phone call you received, or maybe on a dating site, that attractive female or male that reached out to you. Are they all connected? The likelihood is the answer is yes. In this episode, we're going to talk about what's important for you to know and why it matters. Welcome to another episode of the Muddy Waters YouTube series and podcast. My name is Philip Matko. I'm your host. I'm a 5-time published author. And for those of you who are new to the channel, first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I plan for there to be a real payoff, and hoping that you'll join me in future episodes. And I'll tell you why I do what I do. Just three friends of mine alone, have collectively been scammed out of over $500,000. One involved a romance scam that, ballooned into an investment scam. The second and third, both investment scams. Over $500,000, 3 people. And as I shared in a previous episode, our daughter was actually reached out to by somebody on Instagram wanting to commission her to paint a painting. And the scam was small, maybe $900, but she received death threats, and our family received death threats from these I'm not going to use the word scammers. So the reason I launched this channel is if even one person learns something that protects them and their family and their loved ones and friends from what these folks are doing, then every hour that I spend editing, every hour that I spend researching, and trust me, I do both of those extensively, will have been worth it. So welcome to this episode. It's going to be a powerful one, and we're going to tie together many seemingly loose threads and convey to you why and how they're all connected. Let's begin with data breaches. And we're just going to look at a handful of recent events. Wendy's, which is the third largest hamburger chain nationally in the US, had their POS systems, their point of sale systems, hacked in over 300 stores. And that means that bad actors got access to credit card numbers. In some cases, if a debit card was used, PIN numbers. Starwood Hotels POS system was hacked. Hilton Hotels POS system was hacked. The FBI DHS databases, both were hacked, and over 30,000 federal employees' personal information was exposed. Verizon, 63,000 employees' personal information was hacked and exposed. But it gets bigger. These numbers pale against Kickstarter, which was a data breach involving 5.2 million users. There's a cache of over 3 billion background check records by various companies who perform background checks on prospective employees. 3 billion background checks containing everywhere that person was ever employed, everywhere that person ever lived, their family members, their relatives, their credit history. Listen, you might get overload looking at all the data breaches. Data breaches occur on average every 39 seconds. They will cost in 2024 the global economy an estimated $9.5 trillion. And there will be, by the end of 2024, an estimated 16.7 billion compromised personal data records. We're going to talk about the dark web in just a minute. And it's probably a term that you're familiar with, you've heard of. If you never have, you certainly should be aware of it. But I want to address something first. If you're like me, before I started becoming aware of the cyber threats and the bad actors out there in the world and what they were really doing, I assumed when I heard about these data breaches that, hey, you know what, I have LifeLock, or One of the other excellent products out there that monitor my credit reports and monitor the dark web for activity and send me email notifications to alert me if anything should be happening. And I felt like as long as I had those safeguards in place, I didn't really have to worry about data breaches because I had a monitoring system. But the reality is you do have to worry. So we're going to come back to that, stick a pin in that, and let's talk a little bit about the dark web. The terms Internet and World Wide Web are most often used interchangeably, but did you know that there are at least 3 layers to the Internet? And a rumored fourth called the Mariana Web. And we won't touch on that today, we'll save that for a later episode. But let's talk about the 3. Think of the Internet as you would think of an iceberg. The open web or the surface web is the visible surface layer. In the iceberg analogy, that's the part that's sticking above water. And all commonly public-facing websites accessed by traditional browsers like Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, etc., they're all contained here. They're usually labeled with registries like .com or .org, and they can easily be found because they're indexed by these popular search engines. The second layer, while you may not be familiar with the name, you're certainly familiar with this layer. It's called the deep web, and the deep web rests below the surface and accounts for approximately 90% of all websites. This is the part of the iceberg that's underneath the water and much larger than the surface web. In fact, the hidden web is so large that it's impossible to discover exactly how many pages are actually there. But if you think about anything that you have to log on with a password and log on ID, these are databases, intranet, this is access to your online banking, anything that requires password protected access, that is considered the deep web. Now let's talk about the more nefarious cousin, the dark web. In the simplest of terms, the dark web consists of non-indexed websites, which means your traditional browsers, your Chrome, your Internet Explorer, etc., Safari, they can't find them, they can't see them. The dark web requires special tools, special browsers, Tor being one of many examples, in order to access these sites. And they have private traffic funnels, so it's not a case where you can necessarily go onto the dark web and find what you're looking for. Sometimes you have to follow a path that's laid out for you. Sometimes you have to know the breadcrumbs to look for. But listen, not everybody on the dark web is a bad actor. Sometimes people who just value privacy, anonymity, they don't want browsers collecting information on what sites they visit and what things they do and what things they buy, will go to the dark web for legitimate reasons. But the reality is, the majority of users on the dark web don't have the best of intentions. It's become a haven for bad actors, cyber criminals. And it's because there are untraceable services and untraceable websites on the dark web. And that makes it a haven for bad actors. And guess what? Those 16.7 billion personal records that we talked about earlier are being sold on the dark web to cyber criminals. Now let's talk about who those cyber criminals really are. Who are these scammers? Who are these bad actors? It's easy to think, especially if you haven't taken time to really become aware of what's going on and do your research, it's easy to think that they might be one off or two off or a small group of people. That's not the case anymore. I'll share with you a story. There was a chemical engineer, college graduate named Rakesh. Rakesh lived in India. He'd lost his job, and for about 6 months he'd been unemployed. When he stumbled across an ad in the newspaper, or wherever he found it online, I'm not sure, promoting a job for chemical engineers in the country of Thailand. So, he went through the typical interview process, 3 interviews in total, meeting with an agent, going deep into his background, his expertise. And at the end of those 3 interviews, Rakesh was hired. And he flew to Thailand, he flew to Bangkok after receiving a pretty high-priced offer to be a chemical engineer in Bangkok, Thailand. To his surprise, he was picked up by a courier who didn't deliver him to a hotel in Bangkok, but in fact drove 7 hours to the border of Thailand and Myanmar. Now, admittedly, he got nervous. And by the way, he has documented all that he experienced. And there's an excellent article done by CNN. And I'll show you some of the photos from the compound that we'll talk about in just a minute. But they did an extensive interview with him, and he shared his story. So as he's driving those 6-7 hours with the courier, he begins to get suspicious and nervous. He calls the agent who hired him, who says, "Oh yeah, we had a last-minute change. You're not going to be working in Bangkok. We're going to bring you over to another compound instead." So, ignoring his instincts, which he never should have done. Although was he powerless in a foreign country? Yeah, perhaps he was. Rakesh did the rest of the ride. Got to a hotel, checked in, and stayed there 2 days before someone else came to pick him up. And this person brought him to a compound surrounded by 10-foot walls. And when the doors to that compound, when the gates to that compound opened, that's the first time he saw an armed guard pointing an automatic weapon at him. Literally, the car pulls in, the gates close behind him, there's an armed guard pointing an automatic weapon at the window, and he's motioned to get out. And he's made to surrender his passport. He's then walked under armed guard into the compound, sat down at a desk, and told he has to sign a 1-year contract to work in this compound. Rakesh refused, at which point he was thrown into a makeshift jail, and for 3 days he spent 3 days in that jail cell, no water, no food, and finally after 3 days weakened, as you can imagine, because the body can only survive so long without water. Without food a little longer, but without water, I think 48 hours is the max. And he'd gone 3 days. He finally surrendered. He signed the contract. Rakesh was then brought up into a training room. And in that training room, he was assigned a supervisor. Again, armed guards at the door, so there's no way to escape. He's assigned a supervisor, and he's given a playbook and a script. And he's made to practice until he can memorize how that script goes, and he's made to be familiar enough with the playbook to execute it. And then he's brought into a room with 24 or more others, given a computer and a cell phone, and he's given a quota. And guess what that quota is based on? It's based on how many scam victims he can get through the process to the point of when the organized crime behind these compounds can start extracting money from the scam victims. Not making this stuff up. In the country of Myanmar alone, the UN estimates that over 120,000 human trafficking victims have been lured into Myanmar, are held under armed guard in these compounds. They're forced to work 16 hours a day, 7 days per week. And when they don't hit their quotas, when they don't get enough of all of you listening to buy into their scams, they're beaten, they're electrocuted, they're imprisoned, and in some cases they're killed. So why am I telling you all this? Remember back to the data breaches and the dark web. Who do you think the bad actors and the cyber criminals are that your data is being sold to? It's being sold to these criminal enterprises with human trafficking victims given quotas. So now let's complete the circle. This week alone, and it's ironic because I study scams as a passion and a hobby. As I mentioned in the opening, my goal is to help you and help others protect themselves. And information is the best way to protect yourself. Knowledge is the best way to protect yourself. I research scams. This week alone, I have received 5 random, and it's Wednesday, by the way, so 3 days into the week, I've received 5 random text messages, 2 WhatsApp messages, and 2 Facebook messages all very clearly from people that I know are scammers. And you know how they start? The text messages are, hey Roland, do you want to play golf this weekend? Um, hey Tony, are you still selling your car? You know, calling me by the wrong name, right? And it seems innocent enough. And if you've received these messages, you might be tempted to say, hey, sorry, you have the wrong number. This is Ron, not Roland. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because that is step one in the playbook. Those phishing emails that you get from, maybe it's a Best Buy technician that says, we think your system's been compromised. Maybe it's someone who represents themselves as being from your bank that says, we're afraid your account may have been hacked. It could even be a call from the IRS, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security. These scammers are going through just remarkable hurdles to try to get you engaged. I tell a story in one of my previous episodes about a couple in Pennsylvania. They received a call from someone presenting themselves as a detective who informed them that their daughter had been arrested, that she had been driving while intoxicated, and that her car had struck the car of a pregnant mother and killed the mother, the baby and fetus, and another child who was a passenger. And they said, your daughter's in serious trouble. We want to put her on the phone so you can talk to her. And this Pennsylvania couple talked to what they believed was their daughter. And this voice was crying and visibly shaken and stressed on the phone. The PA couple said after the event, they said, we know what our daughter sounds like when she cries. We know what her voice sounds like when she's under stress or pressure. We were convinced this was her. Well, as you might have guessed, it wasn't her. The next morning, the PA couple got a phone call from someone claiming to be an attorney that said, I can get your daughter out of jail. I need $17,000 cash to post bond. So immediately they went to their bank and they withdrew $17,000. A courier showed up at their house an hour later to accept the payment. Approximately an hour after that, they received a second call from the attorney saying, that's not going to be enough money. It's double. We need another $17,000. So the couple, fearing for their daughter's safety, right, as many of us would, went back to the bank, withdrew another $17,000. Another courier showed up, took the money and left. Not kidding. 3 or so hours later, their son-in-law called them, and they said, how's our daughter? What's the update, you know? And he said, oh, she's right here, she's fine. Scammers had used a social media recording of this daughter's voice and replicated it using sophisticated AI techniques. So effective that they convinced parents that they were talking to their daughter and convinced the parents their daughter was in jail and they had to save her and they had to send money. By the way, as a quick aside, if you haven't done so already with your family and loved ones, set up a safe code. Set up a word, whatever it may be. Barry Manilow's nose, onions, whatever that word is, don't put it online, but verbally tell each of your family members what that code is. Because scammers are using what's called vishing techniques, voice altering AI, to create convincing copies of a loved one's voice, convincing them they're in jail, they're in prison, whatever it may be, they need help. Yeah, this is really happening. It only takes a 5-second recording of a person's voice. So that was a quick aside, but I want to get back to the main topic is, you know, you get one of these random text messages, right? Hey Roland, do you want to, you know, are you still selling your car? Do you want to go golfing this weekend? And you respond back and you say, this isn't Roland, this is Ron. Oh, hi Ron, how's your day today? We're wired to be polite, unless we're suspicious, which we should be. Oh, my day's fine, how's yours? Oh, it's excellent. What do you do for hobbies or whatever? You know, the playbook says strike up a conversation, build rapport, gain trust. On the phishing email side of the equation, it's designed to get you to take an action, right? You're going to click on one of the links they send you. On the phone scams, they're going to get you on the phone. They're going to confirm just by you answering. So never answer an unknown number. Let it ring to voicemail. But if they get you to answer, they're confirming that your phone number is correct, right? They may even ask you a question to get you to say the word yes, and we'll touch on that in just a minute. But once they've confirmed those details, or maybe they've reached out to you on a dating site and you've started interacting with someone that you think is an attractive female or a handsome man, and they start showing more attention than they should, more quickly than they should. This should be an alert sign. This is all part of the playbook. And here's where everything ties together. And this is why it's so important to pay attention to those data breaches and ignore those spam and phishing and vishing and outreaches on dating sites, whatever the case may be, random texts. Why it's so important to ignore them. Because your data has likely already been sold and is available on the dark web to very bad actors who know things about you. They may know your home address. They may or may not have your social security number. They may have phone numbers. They may know who your relatives are. They may know where you work or have worked in the past. Remember, we talked about that background check company that had got hacked, right? So they may or may not know all these pieces of information. And all they're trying to do is get a little bit more and a little bit more to eventually use it against you, whether it be identity theft, whether it be hooking you into a longer term scam, such as pig butchering. And I did a previous episode on pig butchering, which I'm going to revisit in a later episode. But it is the process of first gaining your trust, building credibility, building rapport, and then softening you up for the eventual kill and getting as much money as they can before they go in for that kill. When you're getting these random messages, you should assume that they already have your information. You should assume that you're already part of a data breach and that your information has been sold on the dark web. You should not assume that it's just a random person making a random mistake. You should instead assume that it's one of these scam compounds located all around the world. They're springing up in South America, Southeast Asia. Organized crime is behind them. Human trafficking victims are held at gunpoint against their will, forced to perform against quotas, being beaten, enslaved, being electrocuted if they don't hit those numbers. And that's why they're so desperately trying to reach you, is because their own life may depend on their ability to get you engaged in the scam. Wow. So, listen, I know we covered a lot of ground. I want to thank you for staying with me on this. I think it's a super important thread to pull to understand how all of these things are connected and why that random message should and must be ignored. Again, my name is Philip Macko, host of the Muddy Waters YouTube series and podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in. If you got something from this episode, please click the thumbs up button. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. And also, please share this with others. My goal is to spread the word, to help people understand the significant risk that exists today that didn't as I was growing up, that we have to be aware of, because the minute we let our guard down, there are hundreds of thousands of people trying to break through and take what we've worked so hard to get. So I want to thank you for tuning in again. I hope you have an excellent day, and I hope you'll join me for our next episode.